Hi and welcome to the MCA Podcast. It's your fix for everything innovative in advertising production. I'm Pat Murphy and I've been working in this industry for more than 35 years now. I've seen a lot of changes, but know there's many more around the corner. Each week on the podcast, you'll get to hear from one of the movers and shakers who are shaping the world of production for the future. We'll dive into some of the key challenges facing our sector today and how we're best placed to overcome them. Today, you're going to meet Josh Tsui. Josh spent over 2 decades working in video game development at EA and Midway Games. He also co-founded 2 AAA game development studios, partnering with Microsoft and Activision to create original IP and to refresh the historic Tony Hawk franchise. Recently, he led a team of creatives, technologists, and designers producing large-scale location-based experiences with Edge Experiential. Josh also returned to his first love, filmmaking. His current position is as DePaul University's Director of Innovation for the Jarvis College of Computing and Digital Media, a role that brings together all of his experiences in design, filmmaking, and computing. He's also currently in pre-production on his next film, slated for 2025 release. Josh, that doesn't even cover a fraction of your background. Welcome to our podcast.
Hey, Pat. Nice to see you again.
Like me, you studied film and cinematography at college. What attracted you and got you into the world of gaming? Looking back on it now, you were well ahead of time, I think.
Well, yeah, not to toot my own horn, but I like to think so. And I actually got into gaming a little by accident. This was in the early 90s, and computer graphics were just starting to get a little bit more democratized. It was still highly expensive to do, with silicon graphics machines that were tens of thousands of dollars back in the day. And
I remember them well.
Yeah, right. And so, my film background came in handy around that period because computers like the Amiga came out, where that allowed people like me to digitize video in a fairly economical way and have fun with it inside of graphics programs. So I got really into that towards the end of my college years. And it just so happened that that was the era where digitized video became very big in video games, especially with the first Mortal Kombat game. And so Mortal Kombat was made by a company out here in Chicago. And I was graduating from college, and I just got really lucky with the timing. They needed somebody who understood how to shoot people, how to light them, and get them into the computer to manipulate them. And I was just one of those few people that had a pretty decent knowledge of how to do it. So next thing I know, I'm in video games, and I've worked in video games for over 25 years after that.
You're just getting paid for your hobby, aren't you?
Yeah, I've been very lucky that throughout my career, I've been able to work on projects that are very much related to my childhood. I was a big arcade game player back in the 80s. And so I got to work in video games. I used to skateboard, growing up in Southern California, and I got to work with the Tony Hawk games and such. So yeah, I've been very fortunate to just have all my hobbies become my professional career.
Brilliant. Same as me, by the way. I don't think I've ever been paid for work. I've been paid for my hobby every day.
That's so great.
I've never really done a proper day's work in my life. Look, the gaming industry is now worth hundreds of billions and is bigger than the film industry even. Historically, a lot of trends and innovation in the commercial film industry has come from Hollywood and also Bollywood, but increasingly more from gaming. Was there ever a tipping point or a piece of innovation that changed that?
Yeah, definitely once what I call real-time 3D or runtime 3D became as visually appealing as something that you would see in a Pixar movie. And this is something that's really happened probably within the last 5 years or so. Once that video game quality became so good that it looked like motion pictures, everything changed. And it was just a matter of time. Even back in the early days of 3D games that I worked on, they're very primitive looking, but it was all a matter of time because it was all about horsepower, how fast the computers are, how much more efficient the software can be. And so there was a tipping point where game engines such as Unreal and Unity now were spitting out incredible looking images that are very rich and has great lighting, has ray tracing and everything that people were used to from having to render for hours, days, months. Now it's all in real time. And that really changed everything because suddenly it became less about video games and more about, well, how can we now use all this dynamic content that can be changed on the fly and use it for film, TV, and commercial purposes. And you're seeing that. The most famous example is the show, The Mandalorian, which is the first real mainstream shows start using it and showing off what the capabilities are. And it just really has ripped open the industry in terms of what is possible.
And the huge benefits of that, and we were talking on one of our previous podcasts, was using that technology in virtual production.
Yep.
In advertising, of course, the other big benefit, not just from a financial perspective, is the reduction of carbon footprint. You don't need to go on locations and fly around and use hotels anymore. You can do that in an LED studio. It's fantastic. And where do you think all this is going to end up then, Josh, ultimately?
Boy, the way I'm seeing the direction in the technology and even the craftsmanship of all of this is that people are going to start making content. Let's say, an environment for a video game. They can be repurposed in so many different ways and modified and relit and used from everything from video games to ads to film. And there's going to be a giant library of all of these assets out there for anybody to use. And it's really, again, I say the democratization of technology. It's also the democratization of assets. You don't have to build a physical set anymore. Somebody has made it, and now anybody on their desktop can adjust it to whatever their needs are. So if you're doing a commercial that is, let's say, for a dishwasher that's in a kitchen, that asset is out there and it can be freely available to anybody to modify however they need to. And anybody from somebody who's making a very expensive commercial all the way down to a kid making a video game at home has access to that. And it's pretty amazing how that's just going to blow up all over the place.
Well, look, when I think about the future of technology and personalization, which we hear a lot about, I ultimately go to that scene in Minority Report where Tom Cruise is walking down the street, his eyes are scanning, and relevant ads are served up to him there. Do you think that's ever going to be a reality?
I believe so. I think it's a reality now that people are already experiencing without realizing it. Yeah, obviously Minority Report is the ideal situation. There's all kinds of privacy issues that it's going to come up with, and these are all solvable problems. But if you look at where we are now in the world, you go look at a product or you click on an ad on your browser, and next thing you know, you're getting links from Amazon. You're seeing these ads popping up on various web pages as you're going along. That's a mini version of what you saw in the Minority Report, because it's tracking you, it's tracking all your behavior, how long you're looking at an image on the screen, and it'll serve you relevant advertising. The technology to do this in a Minority Report type situation where let's say you're walking by a digital signage and it knows who you are and serves up the ad for you. The technology is all there. All the components are there. It's just a matter of creatively putting it together. If you have a phone in your pocket and there is tracking and a beacon on the sign knows that you're there and it can somehow get your data, whether it's through facial recognition, through your social media activities, whatever information on your phone that's freely available. Again, privacy issues aside, if it can access that, then it knows everything that you've been doing for, let's say, the past few days and serves up the proper ads for it. It's all there. It just needs to be figured out how to put together and obviously how to do it in a very ethical way.
And that is all in a kind of a real life environment, but getting away from the real life environment, like the metaverse, which is a hot topic, of course. Some say that it's going to change everybody's lives. Others just say it's all hype and it's just advertising in video games. What's your perspective on that?
My perspective on it is that somebody's going to create the metaverse that is going to be functional and usable, and it's likely going to be not something that we're expecting. Right now, people's concept of the metaverse is, they see a film like Ready Player One. You're seeing, VR headsets, avatars, everything that Meta is doing. And I think that is all very interesting. It's the first step to what the metaverse eventually will be. But much like a lot of technology that we're used to now, the early days look very different from what we ended up with. And so I think right now we're seeing like the stereotypes of the metaverse. I'm not going to be the technological genius that's going to figure out where it's going to end up, but I'm pretty sure that it's not what we're literally seeing now. There's going to be a piece of technology that's going to make going into the metaverse very easy, just as easy as me talking to you, or me going shopping on Amazon. It's the form factor of how that's going to feel. It needs to be crafted for that experience. And so me putting on a cumbersome headset to go into metaverse and logging in all these different things, all that friction, that needs to go away. It needs to be something like I have a pair of glasses that are just as light as the pair that you have on there that you don't mind wearing all day. And technology needs to get to a point where I can just turn it on and the glasses go right into video screens and allows me to be in that space and not worried about everything that is all connected to me. So it has to have that comfort. And I think that it is going to happen. I think it's going to be way better looking and way better feeling than we currently have. And to go back to the concept of, the Minority Report example, once you get into that world, now tracking what you're doing and serving up content, advertising, all these things to your needs becomes much easier because you're in the digital world. Everything is now very much easy to track what you're doing. That's obviously an advertiser's dream to be able to have that.
And this is all going to have a massive impact on kids growing up, right? And my kids are already in things like Roblox and some of the other games. The nightmare of having to try and drag them away from the screen and get them to do real life experiences like fall out of trees. Do you think that there needs to be a kind of a balance between spending time on screen and then doing other things in real life?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think despite what the technology is, there needs to be a balance on everything that we do. My kids are the same way. Yeah, Roblox is, if you think about it, that's like the gateway drug to the metaverse.
Exactly.
Yeah, at the same time, you'll have people that may watch, back in the day, watching too much TV, that they sit there, they called them couch potatoes back in the day, which nowadays, my kids are like, what the heck is a couch potato? Why would you want to sit in front of the TV all day and just watch sports and movies and such? That to them is very strange too. So the concept of balancing your time has been around a long time, and it's up to us as parents to make sure that we're making them do what they may not want to do, but they eventually enjoy it. They go out and get some fresh air and kick a ball. It may be, we may have to drag them into doing it, but once they do it, they have a lot of fun. And, that's the eternal struggle that we all have. And we all, as responsible parents, want to make sure that they have that balance.
Talking about people growing up, you're also involved in the education sector, which puts you in touch with the generation that are coming into the industry. What is this younger generation looking for in terms of learning and skills and aspiration that you're dealing with the new generation? What are they actually looking for?
They've been looking for more about experiences and less about buying things, especially coming out of the pandemic where workers are working from home. But, students, they have to study remotely and such. And being younger people, you're at that age where socializing is very important. And so I think because of the pandemic, that desire to be amongst people is larger than ever. Now, I work with a lot of students that are working in computing and video games and design and such. And while they love what they're making, they're really thinking about how can we extend this experience. You have VR, which is very much an individual type of activity. So is video games to a certain extent. And a lot of them are now thinking of ways of, if I learn how to do game design, if I learn how to make 3D assets, how can I use this for larger types of experiences like a 360 theater? Can I do a giant installation that can be outdoors that people can enjoy in a communal setting? And so it's been great to see that type of thinking among them, because I'm also seeing that in the industry. I come from an experiential design background, and that industry is booming because people want to go to concerts, they want to go to shows, they want to go to museums, but they want to go there and be wowed a lot more than back in the day. So if I go to a natural history museum and I see, stuffed animals, or taxidermy, that's fantastic and such, but can that be augmented with additional content, or is there a digital activation that'll help me learn even more about what's going on and make everything more dynamic? So it's been exciting to see that type of direction.
And their career paths are completely unknown.
Yeah.
It's not like, in the old days where you kind of knew where you wanted to go. You want to be a doctor, but you knew how to get there and all the different stages of how to get there. This is a first generation in this area. So there isn't really a career path, so to speak.
Yeah, there really isn't a straight path. And I kind of use myself as an example of this. I studied film. I ended up in video games, and then I ended up in experiential design. And now I'm directing an innovation center. And it's a giant nonlinear mess of things, but it's collecting experiences as I go. And so one of the things that I really tell a lot of the students is you may be studying something now, but when opportunity comes to learn something new, and if it seems interesting, definitely go at it. If you're studying, film video and there's an opportunity to learn video game design or video game production or technology, go look into it because you just never know what's going to happen. And you collect this giant bag of experiences. So then once you're out in the real world, so to speak, and looking at jobs, you just never know what will catch on there. A lot of people say, well, you don't want to be a jack of all trades. You do want to specialize in something. And I do believe that. I just feel that anything you go after, be very deliberate about it and be as good as possible with those elements.
When we were talking the other day, you mentioned the example of the Mars M&M characters and the assets that might have been created for the TV being used for digital activity and vice versa. Clearly huge benefits from a cross-usage point of view, but often creative agencies want to create the right assets for each medium. How do we continue to show clients the possibilities in a way that doesn't impact on creativity?
Yeah, I think, with that example, it really comes down to having somebody that is on the client's team that is the best way of explaining it, they're usually a technical art director type, and they understand both the art end of things, how elements should look, but they also understand how it gets built. And so by knowing a little bit of both, they can look at something and see, yes, I understand why you would do this for let's say for video or, something that's not interactive, but they understand that if you just did some slight little tweaks to it, you can then use that asset for so many different purposes. You don't want to constantly be, reinventing the wheel. And so it goes back to the earlier example of you create these art assets and it gets used for, for a lot of different purposes. That technique is getting more and more easier because before it was, if you're doing something for ads, it had to be very high end. But that's not going to play in a video game because video game, back in the day, video game consoles weren't as powerful. Now it's starting to get very much even. And so very realistically, somebody creating something for advertising can go into something interactive with very little adjustment. It's just understanding what those adjustments are. So I think moving forward on things, I feel like it would not be to the client's best interest to not think about that, and I think, advertising and a lot of these production houses, they're going to eventually need to understand how that works because it's not cheap to make these assets and these commercials and such. And so if they can understand that they can use it for so many different things, it makes life so much easier.
There's been a lot of talk and news recently around AI and machine learning. Do you think this will turn into machine intelligence, or is there a limit to what machine learning will be able to do and they'll always need to have some kind of human intervention? Where do you think this is going?
These might be famous last words that's going to bite me, in the future. But my
I'll remind you of this.
Yeah, exactly. My personal feeling is that there will always be a need human intervention because I look at AI as a very powerful tool. It's much like back in the day when photography came around and people said that it was going to replace painting. It's like, no, it didn't replace painting. It was its own medium. But what it did was it changed painting. It went from, paintings went from, the Renaissance days where everything was very photorealistic. It then, it went into Impressionism and Cubism. It started taking on new forms. And photography obviously also evolved too. So I think with AI, it's going to change how people work. Let's say in the example of creating images or even cartoons, it's going to change the processes of things. Is it going to completely replace it? I don't think so. I think that the fact that the AI works off of people feeding it information, the better the feed is, the better the AI is going to be.
Yeah. Just another tool in the box, actually. That's a little bit like Photoshop was when it first came out. It's just another tool for people to use.
Exactly.
Talking of AI, I went into ChatGPT today and I asked it a question, which was, can you give me some questions to ask Josh about AI in production? So I've got 10 questions here. I'm not going to ask you all of these, but I've got my top 10 countdown. I feel like I'm Casey Kasem or Ryan Seacrest. So I'm just going to ask you one or two. Sure. How is AI currently being used in advertising production? And what are some of the most significant benefits and challenges associated with its use?
Wow. I think there's a lot of answers to that, but I think one use is definitely for starting off I was almost going to say storyboarding, but to be honest with you, I think it's about just like structure of now. What are effective structures? So you can look at thousands of ads and thousands of successful ads and look at what made them successful and spit you back an answer of, hey, here are some key elements that now that's going to need fact checking. And of course, this is where the human element comes. You still need somebody smart to look through this and realize, oh, no, this is way wrong. Because it's grabbing information off of the internet, and obviously not everything is accurate on the internet. So that might be a good example.
There's 2 or 3 other things that I can remember as well. I saw something recently written about a piece of music that was written by AI and actually won a creative award, but they didn't put it in as an AI created piece. Wow. It was done as a real human being, and it actually won an award. So that shows the power of this stuff. So another question, what role do human creators play in advertising production when AI is involved? And how can they best work alongside these technologies?
Oh, again, this goes back to what you're feeding it. So the human interaction with AI is incredibly important because you need to tell the AI what you need. And then as it's creating it, you need to have a discerning eye. You have to be very knowledgeable and critical about the feedback that the information that you're getting back, and you're constantly editing on a constant basis. And so a lot of times I'll use AI imagery. There are a lot of people that are having fun, with Stable Diffusion and all these other tools, but they're just going in, they're saying, hey, I want a fish riding a bicycle. And then you get a weird fish riding a bicycle. Yeah. But I noticed that the best images, the best results come from people who have a critical eye. They're looking at it's like, no, I want this. No, they understand, they understand art history. No, I want to base off of this period. I want to base off of this style. And that, that's coming from a human that knows this information. And if they wanted to, they could probably create it themselves, but they want to see what the results are. And they're constantly working at it and going through iterations and such. And so that's, again, that goes back to AI is a great tool. But if you're not knowledgeable, if you don't have, if you don't understand the craft, you're only gonna get back quality as good as you as a person are.
One of the questions that we don't often ask or talk about when it comes to AI is, what are the ethical considerations that arise when using these kind of technologies?
Yeah, that's evolving a lot based off of what I'm reading, because it's taking things off of publicly available, information and such. There's a lot of copyright issues, and I know that there are certain guardrails that they're trying to put up, for copyright purposes. Ethically, boy, there's so many different things. I think one of the issues is going to be that you as the person working with the tool have to understand, at least try to figure out where some of the sources are coming from, because if it's directly taking images from something that's copywritten, you need to be smart enough to at least know like how to track it down, or at least, if you're suspicious of it, you need to find out, where that's coming from. But I wish I had a concrete answer for that, because it's moving so fast, and it's one of those Pandora's boxes.
And you're in a university, so when your students send you their thesis, will you have an idea of whether it's written using AI?
Yeah, and that's the thing. That comes down to the human element of reading something or looking at something and having the intuition to think, how was this exactly put together? And this comes back to, again, the human interaction with people is, I would go to the students and say, all right, this is very interesting. There's something off about this. Tell me how you got to this point. Did you double check this? Because in this day and age, I don't think it's going to be unexpected to have students or people using AI to help their work. I think it's just going to happen. Just be like, back in the 90s, Googling something and finding an article and copying and pasting it and such. So it's going to come down to us talking to them, say, all right, let's talk through this. Did you, what was your process, and how, and how did you actually absorb this information and bring it up?
Tell us about your film.
So I produced a feature-length documentary called Insert Coin, and it's about Midway Games out here in Chicago, which was back in the 90s a small group of crazy people and, who basically got together to make video games in the back of a pinball factory, and they ended up creating just iconic franchises such as Mortal Kombat, NBA Jam. They did the Terminator 2 game. That was a huge hit. And that was my first job out of college, was working at that studio. And even back then, I I kind of felt like I was in the middle of history being made, because the first Mortal Kombat come out and it was just a phenomenon just right off the bat. So that was many years ago. And, I went to film school. I never got to make a film because I got into video games. So I really wanted to make a documentary, and this seemed like a perfect subject for it. And so I made this film. I got into South by Southwest in 2020, numerous film festivals, and now it's available on streaming platforms everywhere.
And you're working on a new one as well.
Yeah, I'm working on a new one. I can't talk too much about it, but it is tangentially related to video games also. But it gets into everything from video games to sports entertainment to taxpayers' dollars paying for subsidizing entertainment and sports, and everything wrapped up around that. So I'm very excited about it.
Fantastic. Well, I mean, I know that you've got that potentially slated for 25.
Yeah.
So we've got a couple of years away, but I wish you all the very best of luck with that and success as well. Now, before we disappear off, tell us what your favorite ad of all time is.
There are a lot of ads that come to mind, obviously. But, one of the ones that I feel like people don't know enough about is an ad for Apple's Macintosh back in the 80s. Now, everyone thinks about 1984, directed by Ridley Scott. And that was, an iconic advertisement. But a lot of people don't realize that, and I believe it was the following year in 85. I'll have to fact check that. But after that, there was another Super Bowl ad that was directed by Tony Scott, Ridley Scott's brother, and it was called Lemmings. And it was a fantastic, beautiful commercial for the Macintosh, where they had all of these people in business attire walking through this grassy field, and they're whistling "Whistle While You Work" from Disney Snow White, and you're seeing them walking along this mountainside, and then you start realizing that they're all falling off of a cliff one by one, and it's just beautifully shot, just creepy as heck and such. And then suddenly one person gets to the edge of the cliff, and he stops. And he takes off his blindfold. I forgot to mention they're all blindfolded as they're falling off the cliff. And takes off his blindfold and realizes that they're all jumping to their doom. And he stops and he turns around and he sees a giant line of people behind him. And then it goes to black. And then and then I think it says like Apple Macintosh or something like that. And it was just so powerful, just so beautiful, because it was just, you didn't know what was going to happen until at the very end. And then you get this kind of sense of doom right there. And it was just beautifully made.
And it's not a film that, many people remember. So it's great that you've kind of, reminded yourself that, because everyone remembers the first one, don't they, from Ridley?
Yeah, it is. And obviously the 1984 is beautiful, but I would say that when people see the Lemmings one, I think that it's on par, if not better, than the 1984 ad.
Great stuff. And we'll be posting that up on our podcast website as well. So take a look at that if you get a chance. Look, Josh, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Really appreciate it.
Oh, no, it's always great talking to you. Thanks for having me.
I want to say big thanks to Josh Tsui for taking some time to talk to me today. It has been a real insight into the world of gaming. I could have talked for hours, and we've obviously heard what's going on in his world of production and what's new and innovative in our industry. To find out more about the MCA Podcast, please head to theprodcast.com, where you'll find details on all of the guests, links to their favorite ads, and full transcriptions of all the episodes as well. If you'd like to feature on the podcast or have any comments, questions, or feedback, please email us at podcast@murphycomp.com. I'm Pat Murphy, CEO of MCA. Do come and connect with us on LinkedIn or Instagram, of which all the links are in the notes of this episode. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks again to my friend Josh here, my team at MCA, and to my production team at What Goes On Media. Thanks for listening. Catch you next time.